The Last Revenge. The Kingdom of the Shadowed Forest. Deep in the heart of the forest, where only faint streaks of light filtered through the thick canopy, thrived a great wild dog colony known as Bast. For generations, these dogs had lived in harmony, following the laws of nature, never harming the weak, and only hunting for survival. Leading them was Ragnar, a fearless black-furred wild dog with golden eyes that gleamed like fire. His body was scarred from past battles, but his spirit was unbreakable. However, a dark shadow loomed over their peaceful existence. Humans had settled near the forest, and among them was a cruel hunter named Cain, a man who saw animals as nothing more than trophies and entertainment. A night written in blood. It was on a bitterly cold night when Cain and his men stormed into the wild dog's village. They came armed with fire, torches blazing as they set the trees alight. The screams of pups echoed through the night as their mothers desperately tried to save them, only to be captured and slaughtered. Ragnar ran to protect his people, but they were outnumbered. Before his eyes, his closest friend Garo was speared through the chest. Sierra, a she-wolf who was like a sister to him, was tied to a tree while her pups were burned alive before her helpless eyes. And then the ultimate cruelty. Luna, Ragnar's mate, who was carrying his unborn pups, was caught in Cain's net. She whimpered, her eyes pleading with Ragnar. "Save us," her gaze begged. But Ragnar was helpless. His pack was being slaughtered, his home was burning, and his family was dying. Cain smiled cruelly as he drove a dagger into Luna's stomach, killing her and the unborn pups in an instant. Ragnar's howl of pain shattered the night, echoing through the valley, but no one came to help. The last wild dog. By the time dawn broke, Bast was nothing more than ashes and corpses. Those who survived were broken beyond repair. Some had their legs crushed, others had their tails severed, and some were left blind. Ragnar, the last surviving warrior, lay in the ruins of his home, too weak to move, too shattered to cry. He crawled to Luna's lifeless body and pressed his forehead against hers. His golden eyes, once filled with fire, were now hollow with grief. But the story did not end here. Ragnar was still alive, and as long as he lived, vengeance would rise from the ashes. The birth of revenge. Ragnar disappeared into the wilderness. He spent weeks licking his wounds, feeding on whatever scraps he could find, waiting for his strength to return. But he was not alone. Others had survived. Those who were once weak had now become warriors. Fang, a pup who had lost one of his legs when Cain crushed it beneath his boot, yet still ran faster than most. Grim, an old warhound, abandoned by humans when he grew too weak to fight for them. Sierra, now blind but with heightened hearing and an unmatched sense of smell. Together, they trained. They learned how to strike unseen, to kill without mercy, to hunt those who had once hunted them. And then, on the night of the blood moon, they made their move. The night of judgment. Under the eerie red glow of the moon, Ragnar and his warriors entered the village. They moved like ghosts, silent and deadly. Fang tore out the throat of the very man who had taken his leg. Grim set fire to the granaries, ensuring that the village would starve through winter. Sierra, despite her blindness, led them to the homes of the hunter's children, ensuring that the pain Ragnar felt would be echoed for generations. And Ragnar? He was going after Cain. The final battle. Cain woke to the sound of low, menacing growls. He reached for his sword, but before he could react, Ragnar was already inside his room. "You should have killed me," Ragnar snarled, his golden eyes burning with hatred. Cain swung his sword, but Ragnar was faster. He dodged and struck, his claws slicing through Cain's chest. The battle was brutal, steel against fury, but Ragnar was no longer the broken dog he had once been. With a final leap, he tore out Cain's throat, standing over his lifeless body as the village burned around him. The legend lives on. As dawn broke, Ragnar stood atop the ruins of those who had massacred his people. He looked at the sky where Luna's soul now rested. "We are no longer prey," he whispered. The remaining wild dogs gathered around him, lifting their heads to the heavens and letting out a victorious, chilling howl. A sound so fierce and powerful that it sent shivers down the spines of every living being in the forest. From that night onward, No human ever dared enter that jungle again. Some claimed that a black-furred demon with golden eyes haunted the woods, hunting those who carried cruelty in their hearts. But the truth was far more terrifying. Ragnar and his warriors still lived, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next hunter who dared to cross their path. Because now they were not just wild dogs. They were the shadows in the night, the vengeance of the forgotten, the rulers of the forest. When cruelty crosses all limits, vengeance does not remain an option. It becomes destiny. The Last Revenge. Part 2. The Blackened Soul. A river of blood. The night smelled of death. Ragnar stood on the ashes of his fallen warriors. Fang's severed head lay at his feet, his lifeless eyes still wide in terror. Sierra's torn body was sprawled across the dirt, her pup slaughtered beside her. And Grim, mighty Grim, had been skinned alive, his fur hanging like a trophy from a tree. Darius Kane and his hunters had left no survivors this time. No pups, no elders, no mercy. Ragnar felt something inside him break. His golden eyes, once burning with fury, now turned cold, lifeless. His pack was gone. His family was gone. He was the last once again, but this time there would be no running. This time there would be no survivors. The path of monsters. For weeks, Ragnar wandered. His body was weak, his wounds deep. He fed on whatever he could find, but his heart remained empty. He wanted to die. He wanted to lay beside Luna, to see his pups again. But then, a voice whispered through the trees, "You are not done yet, Ragnar." He turned and saw him, an enormous black wolf, its eyes glowing like burning suns. Fenrir, the ancient god of war, the beast of legend, the nightmare that once swallowed the skies. Fenrir stepped forward, his breath like a storm. "You want revenge?" he asked. Ragnar didn't answer. He just lowered his head, his body trembling with rage. "Then let me show you how gods make war." The dark transformation. For 40 days and 40 nights, Ragnar trained under Fenrir's shadow. His bones broke and reformed stronger than steel. His claws sharpened, his fangs elongated, his muscles became harder than iron. His fur, once black, turned into a shade darker than the abyss itself. And his heart? It died. He no longer felt fear. He no longer felt mercy. Only vengeance. When he finally emerged from the shadows, he was no longer just a wild dog. He was the blackened soul, and he was ready. The slaughter begins. The village where Darius Kane lived was a fortress. Walls of stone, soldiers armed with silver. It didn't matter. Because that night, Ragnar walked through fire like a demon unleashed. He ripped out throats before they could scream. He crushed bones beneath his claws. He set fire to their children, not out of cruelty, but because Darius Kane had done the same to him. This was not war. This was extinction. And then he found her, the girl in chains. Deep inside Kane's mansion, Ragnar found a cage. And inside it, a creature he never expected. A wild dog pup, but not just any pup. She had Luna's eyes. Ragnar's breath caught. He stepped closer and the pup whimpered. She was starving, wounded, covered in scars. Then a voice echoed behind him. "You recognize her, don't you?" Darius Kane, standing with a dagger dripping in fresh blood, a smirk on his lips. "Your mate was pregnant when I gutted her," Kane said, "but I kept one alive, for fun." Something inside Ragnar snapped. A death worse than hell. Kane ran, but Ragnar was faster. He crashed into him, sending them both through a stone wall. Kane gasped, struggling, but Ragnar held him down. He could have killed him instantly, but that would have been mercy. So instead, he broke every bone in his body, one by one. He ripped his tongue out so he could never scream for help. He clawed his eyes out so he would never see light again. And then, when Kane was nothing but a broken, blind, bleeding corpse, Ragnar whispered in his ear, "You will not die tonight." Then he left him there, alive, because Kane deserved to rot in his own misery. The legend never dies. Ragnar took the pup and left. The village burned behind him, its screams echoing into the night. But he didn't look back. Because vengeance was never ending. Because as long as cruelty existed, the blackened soul would never rest. And in the depths of the jungle, the legend of Ragnar the Eternal was just beginning. When the world drowns in its own sins, vengeance will rise again. Final words. This part of the story isn't just about revenge. It's about the creation of something unstoppable. Ragnar is no longer a leader. He is no longer a warrior. He is a force of nature. And now he is not alone. His daughter carries his blood. And one day, she will finish what he started.